I haven't tried. It's a good idea. I have a new board member who's 23, I think. And she's also going to be like in charge.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the CID's Road to GEM24 event. I am Kailash, and I'm a student at the MPID program. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Student Ambassador program with the CID. And the GEM event, Road to GEM event, is a flagship event for this year for CID. And it's a conference where change makers from academia, government, business, civil society, and practitioners, they come into campus to share insights and sort of develop strategies on a particular topic. And this year, the focus of the GEM24 is gender. And that's why you've been seeing a lot of speaker events around that over the past months as well, on focusing on the barriers women and girls in developing countries face. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a few housekeeping items. So it's a hybrid event, and we'll be asking questions virtually as well. And it will also be both in person, and I'll be walking around, so feel free to let me know if you have a question. And we'll also share the recording of the session, but we'll keep the camera on the speaker. So that ensures that only voices from the audience will be recorded, and the video will be available on the CID YouTube channel afterwards. And also there must be QR codes around or right behind me as this as well. So please feel free to scan it. So this will help you kind of get up to date in the future about different CID events and kind of be in the loop for the programming. And also please make sure to subscribe to CID's newsletter. And also there is a blog that's coming out that's been kind of recently started called CID Voices, and feel free to follow it, where there will be different kind of articles that are going to be published around various talks happening around or different discussions happening around on campus. Yes. So we are doing it with sorry, do you mind?
Hi, I'm Nicole Carter-Quinn. I'm the Executive Director of the Women in Public Policy Program here at the Kennedy School, and we are thrilled to be co-sponsoring the Road to GEM and the GEM Conference with the Center for International Development. And Nancy Birdsall was also a fellow with us for several years at the center. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so, yeah, so Dr. Nancy Birdsall, who is the President Emeritus of Center for Global Development. It's a policy-oriented research institution founded in Washington, D.C. And prior to launching the center, she served for 3 years as a Senior Associate Director of the Economic Reform Project at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And from 1993 to 1998, she was Executive Vice President of the Inter-American Development Bank, and she spent 14 years in research, policy, and management positions at the World Bank. And she was also the Director of the Policy Research Department. Besides that, she's the author, co-author, and editor of more than a dozen books and monographs, including Delivering on Debt Relief from IMF Gold to a New Aid Architecture, the White House and the World, a Global Development Agenda for the Next U.S. President, Fair Growth, Economic Policies for Latin America's Poor and Middle Income Majority, and New Ideas in Development After the Financial Crisis. So her most recent work focuses on global governance and the international financial institutions, women's empowerment and its relationship to reproductive choices, which are related to the topic today, and the financing of global public goods for development. And thank you all for coming. And we are all super thrilled at the CID and the web to kind of host this event. And Nancy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kailash, and thank you to CID and WAP. I have very fond memories of both centers when I was here 4 or 5 years ago, I forget. So it's a coincidence that I chose to talk today about reproductive choice and women's agency. a coincidence. I didn't know then about GEM this year. So good. That's a good start. I have no idea and had no idea in thinking about this talk, which is based on a paper that's quite technical and has a lot of econometrics in it. At some point, I thought, talking to Caitlin, I think, that maybe that wasn't going to work well. So I'm just, anyone should feel free, including those of you who are from WAP and CID at some level, to say, nah, wait, stop. I have tried to detect, if you know what I mean, this presentation. So let's start with what I'm going to talk about in what order. Yeah, our model. This is a paper with, maybe I should go back. I don't know if we have the cover page. No. It's a paper with several colleagues, including Mead Over, who's also a fellow at the Center for Global Development, and several research assistants, because we started this paper about 4 years ago and then set it aside. And now we're in the process of updating it using more recent data. But I'll be talking about where we were 2 or 3 years ago, maybe even a little more. So our model, our data, some analysis, policy implications, and country rankings of RCE, which I'll explain in a few minutes what RCE is. Let me start with the sort of motivation, which has to do ultimately with the question of women's economic empowerment, which matters to me as a development economist a lot. Think about Christine Lagarde, former head of IMF, said women are macro-critical. So women's economic empowerment matters for long-term development. So what matters for women's economic empowerment? That's the question on my mind and on others' minds. And a key message is that contraception, access to and availability of convenient and low-cost contraception, matters for economic development. This is a picture of Claudia Golden, who was the Nobel laureate and is here at Harvard, of course. And I love this picture. I titled the slide Power of the Pill, which was the title of the article, or of an article in which these graphs appeared. It's also Claudia Golden's story. She and I were born in the same year, 1946. I looked it up, as was Janet Yellen. So I'm in good standing in terms of my birth year as a female economist. Why is it my story? Well, I, like these other two female economists, very distinguished, was born in 1946. The left graph shows, it's very hard to figure out quickly, don't worry about it, that the pill, now what's the right way to say this? When I was about 22 in 1968, the pill, the contraceptive pill, was still actually not legally available in some states for unmarried women. It had become available for married women in 1965 with a Supreme Court decision. But it was relatively easily available, even though it wasn't legal. And I was in the District of Columbia, a liberal blue state. I bet it was available in Massachusetts as well at the time, even though still illegal. And what the graph shows is that in that year, in about 1968, 10% of college-educated women were using the pill, of those born around 1945, 46. Women born every year after that, until about the mid-70s, were using the pill more and more. So that by the mid-1970s, 30% of college-educated women were on the pill. I'm surprised it's that low. Maybe it was more. So what happened is shown on the right for college-educated women. And what's wonderful about the photo is that the curves match pretty much. And what the right graph shows is the increase over the same period in the number of college-educated women who applied to medical, law, business, and what's the one I'm missing?
Dentistry.
No.
It says so up here.
Oh, yeah, it does say MBA and business school. The big ones are medicine, law, and MBA. It's interesting they have dentistry in the report, but it's good. So basically, that was, a couple of years after I finished college. And it's true that many of my female colleagues in my college class went after a couple of years, 2 or 3 years after graduation, they went on to school. And I have always still a question as an economist, whether it was not only an increased supply of women interested going to professional schools, but with the pill, were the admissions committees more likely to accept women? If you think particularly of medical school, on the grounds that they did not have this barrier, the male admissions committee, in their minds that women would start and then get pregnant by accident and have to drop out. So no longer was there a vision for the male admissions committees of that distinction between men and women. So this is a picture from, talking to this mic, will it work? No, it's easier. This is a picture from Malaysia. And again, it looks complicated, a little complicated to absorb in 1 minute, but it's basically telling the same story in a different way. It shows that the earlier a girl in Malaysia was exposed to the fact of a family planning clinic in her village, the more likely is she, when she's old enough to work, to be in the paid formal labor force. And this is from a paper of Bobby Ars and Miller and others. So it's the same concept, that some access to, some familiarity with the reality that you can use contraception matters. So our model. It's actually different than mine. But anyway, we focus on women's economic empowerment, not on women's economic empowerment per se, but on its precondition and enabling reproductive choice ecosystem. So that's RCE, reproductive choice ecosystem, which will occur as I talk several times. The point is the ecosystem matters. It matters for agency, which is a term used quite often for those of you who know the gender literature, where agency is the capacity to make choices in your own self-interest based on your own goals. So why does it matter? Well, it matters where where the ecosystem for reproduction is positive or a good one for a young woman's ability to make choices about her own future, in effect. And to repeat, it's a precondition. Agency is a precondition for women's empowerment, and women's empowerment is important for development. So that's the motivation behind trying to understand what matters for women's agency and how important is something we call the reproductive choice ecosystem. And here is a picture of the reproductive choice ecosystem. Now, for those of you, have any of you studied econometrics?
Yes.
Show of hands. Okay, so you'll be familiar with regressions, where you have something that is being affected, something on the left side being affected by something on the right side. The interesting thing about this ecosystem and the way we look at it is that we have 3 dependent variables on the left side. three things to look at that are affected by these factors in something we call the ecosystem. But we don't observe the ecosystem. It's what's called a latent variable in econometrics. So the things on the right, development factors that I'll talk about in a minute, they're sort of obvious. You can think of them ahead of time, like education or access to formal jobs. Those things matter, policies matter, and social attitudes matter for the reproductive choice ecosystem. And the reproductive choice ecosystem has an effect on not just age at first birth, but also age at first marriage or cohabitation, and the years between the first time a woman uses contraception and when her first birth or her marriage occur. So all of these, this is called a mimic model for those of you who are interested, multiple inputs and multiple outcomes. And the assumptions of the model are unintended pregnancy resulting from sex defines a critical social difference between men and women. It's obvious when you say it, but it's important to say. This puts a woman at a disadvantage because she bears the cost disproportionately. And that differences in use of modern contraception and abortion signal differences in individual women's agency. Okay, so we're saying contraception is a critical factor, not only indicating women's agency, but signaling differences across women in that agency. And finally, the timing of first pregnancy is a better proxy for women's agency than the number of children born, which has been sometimes used. Okay, if you think about it, it's true. Whether you have a baby or get married at age 15 or at age 30. Actually, do any of you know the current age at marriage in the United States and Europe, rich countries?
28.
Average.
28 is about right, I think. It's,
Average, you mean?
yeah, the average, right. So, and the average age at marriage in developing countries, well, you'll see it at some point. You could even find it here. Maybe not exactly, but no, not here. But it's in some countries, 15, 16, 17 is the average. And in most countries, it's below 20 in most developing countries. I think I'm right about that. So this picture, will someone tell me when I have more 15 minutes left or 10 minutes left? That'd be great. Kayla, you're cultural. You're in charge of. So this picture just shows fertility levels in developing countries. It shows a couple of things that, let's see. This is from demographic and health surveys. For any of you working on these kinds of issues, you'll know about these surveys, which USAID has financed over many developing countries over many years. What the picture shows is that the number of children or the total fertility rate is lower at higher levels of GDP per capita, that it's declining over time in developing countries. And we see the colors? Yeah. The blue line is lower, which is for fertility, and higher for age at first birth, the richer the country, and the later in time the country. These are not surprising facts for anyone who's thought about it or studied any of this. Okay, so fertility is converging across the world, you could say. Many of you will know in China that it went down. Now they're trying to get it to go up. That's one example. But that in Europe, it's below 2, below replacement rate, and so on. In developing countries, it's still certainly above replacement rate. So let's go on to point 3, which is data and data sources. On the right-hand side variable, we have this set of data, and the only thing you need to focus on is the economic indicators that are typical. This is all part of the reproductive choice ecosystem for women. The economic indicators, there are policy variables such as family planning availability in the country that a woman's living in. And then there are social attitudes and norms, and that's probably the biggest new thing in this work we're doing, is the incorporation of social attitudes and norms. And they are from the demographic and health surveys over the years. And I'm just going to read them to give you an idea. The ones we use, the percentage of women who say it's justified to refuse sex for all of 3 reasons that come up, like, you know, a woman can refuse sex. No, the woman can refuse, is justified to refuse sex if the man has had an affair, for example, or is being violent, this sort of thing, for all 3 reasons. The percentage of women who have some kind of final say on visits to relatives, which turns out to be more important in rural areas, not surprisingly, than in urban areas. These are positive things. And the percentage of women who say, oh, I'm muddling a little, who say wife beating is justified for any reason. And finally, from the World Values Survey, which many of you may be familiar with if you're working on sociology, is the percentage who say that men have more of a right, the percentage of people who say that men have more of a right to a job than women when jobs are scarce. And the percentage who say university is more important for boys than girls. Okay, so those are norms. And then on the left side, as in the picture I showed you, we have 3 dependent variables: age at first birth, age at first marriage or cohabitation, and age at first use of contraception. And then finally, because that didn't work very well for reasons I'll show you, we changed to years between first contraception and the earlier of either marriage or first birth. So, you know, many women in rich countries use contraception before marriage or first birth. So this is helping to define that. In developing countries, it could be 3 or 4 years. It could be only after the first birth, etc. So when does contraception first happen? Let's look at economic opportunities for women. Not enough hands here. You see here has a formal job. This stuff is actually very interesting for many purposes in terms of doing research. This is 36 to 49-year-olds. And you can see on the left, sub-Saharan Africa has a formal job. It's hard to see a little bit the countries, but in Africa, Lesotho is the highest one. And that's
not the right slide.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
There.
So that's Lesotho way up to the right, which is, many of you may know why. I don't know why I know why, but I remember there was a legislation in the U.S. It still exists, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And Lesotho was a country that took advantage of that with textile exports. So, I mean, it's amazing, you know, what you would think of in the world of women's empowerment in the GEM world as almost an accident. 25 years ago, AGOA made it possible for a few countries to thrive in creating textile jobs. And as you know from Bangladesh and other parts of South Asia, that matters a lot for women taking jobs. So boom, there it is, Lesotho. On the bottom in Africa is Mali with 2% of women in a formal job the year the data was collected. On the right side, you have other countries. The Philippines is up there, 30%, and Pakistan, it's less than 10%. of women have formal sector jobs. A policy variable is next, family planning index. And this shows kind of interestingly that the developing countries are catching up on family planning effort. It's a very weak variable for those of you who might be interested in trying to use it. It's based on asking experts in developing countries how much they think, what's the nature of this government's effort to expand family planning. So it's a little bit shaky. Okay, and now we come to data on social attitudes toward women. And this is the most interesting part, for me anyway, of the work we're doing is incorporation of these norms. You see that wife beating justified for any reason is going down, which is a good thing. On the left in sub-Saharan Africa, all the lines are going down. It's still very high and bad in Mali and Ethiopia. Those are the two top ones. It's low in Colombia and the Dominican Republic. And it's falling everywhere, which is a good thing around the world. And here we have women get any kind of final say on visits to relatives. That's low, but at least it's rising in most places. It's very low in Senegal and Mali. Francophone, wrong picture. Thank you. Okay, this was the wife beating, justified for any reason. So we want it to go down. Is that right?
What's that country going up?
Guinea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Guinea. Yeah, we want it to go down.
Madagascar's going up.
Yeah, some are going up. Changes in the political arrangements, no doubt. That would be my guess when you have anomalies. But in other countries, it's going down pretty much everywhere. Interestingly, for Kailash in Nepal, way down. Do you know why? No? Any thoughts later? Tell me any thoughts later. No, in the discussion period. It's very low in Nepal, Peru, Colombia, and the DR. So Nepal is a sort of outlier in South Asia for sure. You see India, I don't know if you can see Egypt, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Morocco, no, that's Jordan, it's fallen a lot. Senegal and Mali, not so good.
And Indonesia is going up, right? On the slope is up. Is it Indonesia? I just can't see it. The I country next to Egypt, right below Egypt. The one that is going up. So the slope is.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's political change too, I think. I don't know. You know, some reversal of openness or you never. Oh, thank you for the warning. Okay, so but this is interesting, I hope, for many of you just seeing the data. This next one is more from the World Values Survey. No, this is all good, pretty much going up. Very low in Senegal. There's Pakistan. Not good on visits, a woman being able to go visit her relatives, you know, without too many permissions. This is university more important for a boy than a girl. We'll go quickly, but it's good when it's going down, as in India on the right, in urban India. It's going down in rural India, but for some reason it's going up in Ghana. Who knows?
And Mali, there's only one data point.
Probably, yeah. Exactly. Okay, and finally we get to the agency variables, age at first birth. by GDP per capita, going up, good thing. We already know about the US. In India, the age at first birth, when these data were collected, so it could be 5 or 10 years ago, was 19 for age of first birth and 18 in Bangladesh. And age at first marriage is going up, but sorry, whoops, I'm also making it complicated. Okay, on to some analysis, some assumptions. You don't want to read all this. I'll just tell you, this set of words is saying we use the norms of older women, 36 and above, as a determinant of some of the behavior of younger women defined in the agency way. The reason for that has to do with exogeneity. You can't ask the same women that you're looking at, since everything will be a bit of a circle. So these are the older women, and it's in their neighborhood. DHS collects and interviews people in clusters for practical reasons in part, and the clusters are in effect neighborhoods within rural areas, or certainly within urban areas, they're neighborhoods. So these are the older women where the younger women live. What else are we saying here? That's the main thing. Yeah. So this is a very confusing. Don't try to read it, just listen to me. It says on the right what's important, what turns out to matter a lot, which is those norms, having a formal job, education, of course, and country level norms in some cases when we had to use it, and sometimes the norms of the older women. So not a big surprise here for what matters. Women's education, has a formal job matters. Not the policy variables. They don't show up strongly. Family planning effort and the Women Business and Law Index, which is a World Bank index, that they're working on improving. And so we'll see. That's why we're updating the whole thing. So this just is a reminder that we have multiple outputs and multiple inputs. And the inputs include development type things, policy type things, and social attitudes. So the idea of mimic in econometrics is that you can use all 3 dependent variables instead of just one, and you get a fuller picture. And as it turns out in our case, it's more robust, statistically more robust. So where am I? So that's just reminding you, right? And more now we do repeat the analysis, not just on age at first birth, but with all 3 variables. And some new things come out, but the main thing, for lack of time, and probably you're not interested in these econometric details, is that the results are more robust. They're more convincing. It's a good way to think of it. Let's see. Let's skip a little bit, have time. This is kind of interesting. What this says is that at high RCE, when the ecosystem is very good for women's agency, and this is actually based on the data, you get, for the first time, contraception before age at first birth or marriage, which is pretty rare across the developing world, certainly compared to the rich world. But that's what it says. Not important to try to figure it out, but this is actually from the data itself. And you get years from contraception to first birth or marriage is positive only at very high RCE. when the index is very high. So you can just believe what I'm saying and not try to figure out the picture. Policy implications, which is important in the world and important in a public policy school, right? So for those of you who know Gary Becker model, it says that what matters for fertility is prices, represented by women's ability to go out and work, which raises the price of children. Income, which is positive for the price of children. And let's see, then formal sector jobs, if they're available, makes the price higher. And this is the basic idea behind the very notable decline in fertility in the rich world over the last 30, 40 years. And it's a basis for the difference between, in general, developing countries and the developed countries. So the Becker model is vindicated, particularly with the very good data we got and the way we defined formal jobs for women. The more there are available, as in Lesotho, the lower fertility is, and the higher age at first birth, and women delay marriage, they're working, and so on. So that's the bottom line. The social norms matter as much or more. This is sort of fun because Eliana La Ferrara is here. I don't know at the Kennedy School, but she's here. Yes, I think so. Right, good person to have in the year of GEM or the semester of GEM or whatever it is. And she has a very well-known article that says in Brazil, when women started watching soap operas, this is many years ago in the 60s, probably 1960s, it opened up their eyes to the, a bigger world and other things to be done. And she shows that in very clever ways. So it's very well known in the fertility world. So the Becker model is vindicated, social norms matter, and it raises the policy question, should more attention go to direct efforts to change social attitudes? Since they seem to matter a lot and they matter sooner in a woman's life. They matter when women are teenagers. And what would be those efforts, say, to push harder on prohibiting child marriage, which is still controversial as a legal thing, and to enforce in developing countries, and in female genital mutilation, FGM, or cutting. So that's a big policy question I find pretty interesting. Compared, for example, to more and more effort to have family planning available, maybe more thinking about social attitudes and norms. This shows this RCE, we're able to rank countries by their reproductive choice ecosystem. You have here Vietnam, Jordan, and the Philippines, and Rwanda, and Egypt quite high. And down here you have Niger, Bangladesh, Guinea, Mali, Liberia, Mozambique, Ethiopia. So those are the countries where some thinking about these things would be good. This is a nice graph that shows in a few countries where the median RCE is lower or is the bottom part of the RCE is, how can I say this for countries? It has to do probably with the distribution of income, but in a place like Nigeria, it's a very big, important country. There's a big decline between the middle RCE across people and the lower RCE across people. Yeah, time to stop. Oh, yeah. We can stop. Let me see. Thanks. Oh, I went the wrong way. Think of your question or your comment. We have somebody waiting.
My question is from the virtual audience, which is, could you talk a little bit more about the price of children. So what goes into that? Are we thinking only about economic prices or other things that women might give up or value? What does that look like for your research?
Right. Pardon me?
So I think the question was about the price of children, economic prices, or how do you really look at this kind of variable?
The Becker model.
Yes. So those are the only things I've ever thought of, and that I think most economists have thought of. Do you have ideas? What else?
I can ask on the chat. I think it was just a question about clarifying what variables go into that
price.
calculation of the price.
Yeah, it's about the woman's time. So the focus in this work on formal jobs is typical, since it normally means a paid formal job means leave home, children are home. So, you know, there are additional costs associated with the children. You have to have somebody else watching the children, taking care of the children, right? So you have to deal with that, assuming that the husband exists, and if he exists, that he's working also. So it is about the price of children. So what else raises the price? I guess, you know, availability in the US, availability of childcare. I've observed I have 2 daughters and a son, and they have much more trouble having a babysitter than I did, because when I was with kids at home, there were a lot of immigrants because of this sort of cycle of changes in immigration policies for real in the US. So it was soon after 1986, which changed things for many immigrants. So that's what else would be in the price, you know, loss. A woman loses time for other things, not just work, but other things, seeing friends, running around, etc.
Here.
Hi, I'll stand up so my back isn't to everyone. So I'm Catherine Riley, and I started at the Kennedy School in 1984 and finished my PhD here 1994. No, 1993. So my question to you is about your emphasis on policy trying to influence social norms. So the question is, aren't social norms a function of women's economic empowerment, women's fallback position in terms of, say, okay, women, you should get out, you should be more open to working, or you should resist domestic violence. But isn't that a function of how much power she has in the household, which is a function of her economic earning power, bargaining power? So I'm saying, is it sort of circular?
Yes, exactly. You are absolutely right. In an econometric or statistical sense, that's why we use the social norms of the older women, not the women we're looking at. So it's their aunts and uncles and neighbors in their neighborhood whose social norms, yes, were endogenous or shaped by whatever their circumstances were, but they're separate from, they don't entail that cycle for the younger women, where the younger women's social norms, you know, obviously, whatever they may be, affect whether they're married early or not. Mike.
Here, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask you about the reproductive choice. Is when you add abortion to the equation, does that change and make the possibilities larger? Like, I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, if not only anticonceptional, but also when you add abortion to the equation, does it help to give more flexibility? And I think I'm from Brazil, and we talk a lot about like how it's a health issue rather than, like religious and
Right. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. Actually, I speak Portuguese. If you want to try.
Hi, I'm a professor in line development in Brazil from Unicamp, and I'm a senior fellow at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I'm just here this semester because I'm working with some charities and migrants here in the Boston area, so I'm going to stay for spring and summer. And the HKS was welcomed me and kind enough to have me here, like just rovering around and participating in some events that are important for my research in migration. But if I understand correctly, yes, in Brazil, the big discussion now it's around this word agency, right? Because also using a word you said, the ecosystem of reproduction and human life in general. Many women now are struggling with the other thing, which is motherhood. Like they want to be a mother, which is very different from other generations. Therefore, what is the health issue? It's because if you use contraception, especially in developing countries that had been used as a lab for many pharmaceuticals, you're going to have women taking contraception and having strokes and other health-related issues. So they are left alone with the choice of cleaning the ecosystem, and the male counterpart of bringing life into the equation are just like, oh, I have nothing to do with anything. It's your problem. You didn't take contraception. Now you have to deal with abortion. And that leaves scars as well, and also, entails other health problems. So I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but I mean, if this model, and I would love to discuss the methodology after, but this model takes into consideration other solutions, and also if the solutions have, an impact in the word agency and what women are left with the so-called choices. So if I could highlight from her question the word health and choice, I think that they relate to what you're saying as agency and ecosystem. So maybe I'm not sure if this is helpful.
Absolutely. No, the answer is yeah, of course. It's a good point. It's a big issue right now in the US, right, with the ban on abortion in some states. So yeah, every country is in a little bit different situation. Brazil is a country that in urban Brazil is it's a developed country for all practical purposes, mostly, heavily. So it's right. What is the policy implication? It's mostly around health issues and the pharmaceutical industry, by the way, of course. And the hidden cost to women of using certain forms of contraception. But that's changed in the right direction tremendously in the last 40 years. The pill was great, but the pill then no woman would take now.
Right.
That's important. Right.
Let's take one more question. And also right after this, we have a career chat with her in the Perkins conference room where everybody's invited. So anybody who has a question. All right.
Oh, yes.
I was wondering if you knew any particular levers around the policy implication that you gave that perhaps direct efforts towards changing social attitudes might be effective within this ecosystem. Do you know of any direct efforts that have been particularly effective at changing things such as child marriage or FGM?
Not enough. There aren't enough for me to know. I mean, there might be more than I know about. There's a lot of places, particularly in Africa, where they're trying to change attitudes about female genital mutilation. They're having some reversals I just saw in the paper recently. So, it takes at least one generation. Yeah. So it's sort of sad that the only thing that jumped into my head thinking about this was the soap operas in Brazil. I think it's a matter of people feeling creative about the issue and in their own country, in their own setting. It's not something, my guess is that yeah, child marriage. Well, there are laws in many countries in Africa that are about child marriage. Someone at the Center for Global Development did work on that some years ago. You might be able to find it on our website, showing that, the laws would be ignored, right? So once the law is in place, then it matters the extent to which a government, but you can't enforce those laws. It's more spreading word about those laws so that more people buy into it, right? So not unlike in any democracy. But there's no question in my mind that these social norms, from the work we did, that the social norms are really, really far more important than economists generally have assumed, more important than prices and income and jobs and so on, in developing countries at any event. So it's a good thing to think about and work on in the GEM context included.
Right. Thank you so much for your talk today. And please feel free to compost all of these materials. They're all compostable. And we have a career chat right in Perkins conference room. Just feel free to follow us right there in the CID area. Thank
For
you.
men too.